This is the first installment of the Education at the Intersection of Equity and Innovation speaker series. My name is Marcus Howard, and I'm the expert in residence with Venture Cafe St. Louis and the moderator for this evening's conversation. And so we want to start off by thanking our sponsor, the Regional Business Council, for making this series possible. And the Regional Business Council is a consortium of 100 CEOs representing large mid-cap companies in the local St. Louis metropolitan areas. Kathy, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Welcome to everybody. And I'm very excited for today's work. We've been very involved in education reform. We helped bring Teach for America here now, I don't know, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and brought KIPP charter schools here. They now have 6 schools, serve 3,000 kids. What we liked about their model is it could grow to scale and have some real impact. So we want every kid to have an opportunity to learn. So we're always looking at new innovation. And when Marcus approached us, I thought this would be something that would be a conversation that was important to have. And we're happy to support it tonight and very much looking to Josh's remarks. And maybe he'll start off and tell you what's going on in his life right at the moment. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, hey, it's good to see everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm parked outside of the hospital. My wife is 39 weeks pregnant, and look for a second there like we're gonna be admitted to the hospital to have the baby like tonight, but we're not. So I did not plan to do this from my car, but I'm happy to do it. And I think like maybe what's easiest is like I'll just share a little bit about kind of this like amazing opportunity that I got to start a school with Elon Musk, and kind of like how I've tried to make sense for it and kind of to atone for my good fortune, and then to try to design things that are really compelling for students. So, I mean, I guess I'll just start with like, I did Teach for America in Las Vegas. It changed my life, just taking that responsibility for leading the class of 33 fifth graders and trying to figure out how you can actually like stand behind the stuff that you're giving them. It just felt like I just kept on giving like worksheets like over and over again. And I didn't make those worksheets, and I didn't structure the problems the way that they were structured. And I just like wasn't really sure like why I kept doing it. So, little by little, I just started like designing more of my own stuff, as many teachers, of course, have done since the beginning of time. And, I did Teach for America for, the 2 years. I stayed for a 3rd year at my placement school. And the 4th year, I ran a gifted and talented program at my placement school and 2 others in East Las Vegas. And a woman I met in Teach for America, who was in the Chicago core, had moved to LA. We started kind of dating, and she was like, I'm not moving to Vegas. You need to move to LA. So I was panicked because I was an Ohio kid that like was terrified of traffic in LA and California in general. And the only schools that were really hiring at the time were private schools, independent schools. The school I got a job at was a school called Merman School for Highly Gifted Children, which is just as pretentious as it sounds, really. And like, I don't know, there's just like a lot that surprised me. Like, I just kind of imagined that, you go to a school like that has like tremendous resources, and you just would, I just thought it would be, I don't know, I thought it'd be like Hogwarts or something, like just totally different. And I thought people would be like really engaged in the learning and engaged in kind of the thinking, not because they weren't where I was coming from, but just because like, how could you not when you have a campus that looks like a country club? It just felt like all that privilege would certainly have like translated to some sort of innovation. And that was not the case. I guess, without, and that wasn't just specific to that school. I think it was specific to many of the other schools in that city, in the city of LA. So I went to that school, and I was there for 2 years. My 2nd year, I had one of Elon's sons. He's got 5 boys. I don't know if you know this, twins and triplets, all boys. Oh, wow. I had one of the twins in my class, and he came, I don't know, maybe October for a parent-teacher conference. And we talked about basically everything other than kind of like school. We talked about Tesla and SpaceX and how things were going at the time. And just to give you a sense of like Elon Musk then versus now, in 2013, I guess, when this first conversation happened, he maybe had like a couple 100,000 Twitter followers. Now he has like 50 million. So just in terms of like the scale of Elon's growth as a public figure, and obviously the growth of the companies. So we sat down, talked about a few different things, and then I got an invitation to come to SpaceX to talk about a potential opportunity. I was scared out of my mind. I, of course, like couldn't find parking. I was late. Elon graciously was like, well, let me show you around, like give me a tour of the factory, and then sat down, was like, all right, what do you think of the school the kids are at now? And I told him, and he's like, all right, well, like, so what should a school look like? And I'm sure I threw together some semi-coherent thought. And then we kind of talked about it for a bit. He's like, all right, well, it sounds good. Like, let's like, do you want to do this? And I was like, of course. Like, yeah, of course. He's like, well, why don't you like think about it for a bit and get back to me? I was like, okay. So I went home, tried to explain this to my mom, my dad, my wife. They're like, you're teaching fifth grade. Like, you're gonna run a school for Elon Musk. Like, what are you talking about? You're like a fifth grade teacher. You're gonna teach at the school that he's creating. Like, where's it gonna be? And who's it gonna serve? And all those, obviously normal questions you ask. And so then I obviously was like basically up all night, wrote Elon an email, like 3 or 4 in the morning, was like, all right, I'm in, here are the steps, here's what we should do. And that was maybe mid-November. And then I went through all the holidays, Thanksgiving, and then, the kind of winter break, Christmas time, New Year's, no response. So I was like, all right, well, I guess this opportunity will never materialize because I don't know. Maybe I blew it in the interview, or maybe he changed his mind, or maybe 1,000 things. Maybe found someone who actually I don't know, was running some program at Stanford, or I don't know, it's Elon Musk. You can hire anyone in the world. I'm teaching fifth grade at this kid's local school. So I'd like to say I kept the faith, but I did not. I was like a basket case about it for, I was checking my phone that next day, like every 2 minutes. And then, eventually, the days go on, you're like, all right, this probably isn't going to happen. And I was just too proud, I guess, to write a follow-up email, which now in retrospect seems stupid. But anyway, as things turned out, January 15th or so, I wrote the email, like, hey, Josh, things got super busy. Like, let's move ahead and create this school. So I guess my story just sort of comes into this incredibly fortunate opportunity. I've been working in public education. I go to this independent, this private education school. It's not what I kind of imagined. I meet Elon. He's obviously someone who just seems to just spin off companies, off the top of his head, and they just seem to happen to become multi-billion-dollar companies. And for me, it was just kind of all right, well, there's no excuse to not make a really special school. And there's a big importance on thinking through first principles about what could this school be and what could it come to represent. So for us, the charge, us as in the team, the charge was to create a school that would serve the children of SpaceX and those in Hawthorne, so the surrounding community, and then really anywhere else in LA if we found kids that were kind of up for the challenge. So the school started in a conference room at SpaceX. It moved to what turned out to be Gene Wilder's old house, this house off of Sunset near UCLA. And then we were back on SpaceX campus for years 3 through 6. I've since left SpaceX campus, spun off the school as Astra Nova School. There will probably be an Ad Astra school that will one day be in Boca Chica, Texas. Now it's called Starbase. And that's kind of the future of Ad Astra. So, I mean, for me, it's okay, so designing a school, what could I do that would be different? And I think for me, it was very clear early on with a small team, just a small number of students. It's all right, what are the things that are going to make the greatest difference in any possible future? And those things generally are, at least I think most people agree, the ability to collaborate at a high level is really important. The ability to make sense of the world, and the sort of the capacity to make decisions, and as a kid to make some bad decisions, but be able to own those and reflect on them and grow, because that's the purpose of getting kids together in school, is to you can make mistakes, and those mistakes should be safe. So it's well, how do we develop student voice, and how do we give them these collaborative opportunities, and how do we make all this happen within the confines of still school walls, though those walls looked a lot different than maybe the walls at Mermin or the walls of the school that I worked at Vegas. So I just created this thing called Synthesis, which was this catch-all class that really just I would just design just little scenarios or little case studies, or just little conundrums, basically just little puzzles that were really welcoming, but really grew in complexity if you were to think about them. So some of them were more realistic, here's the budget for NASA, and here are the different programs that you can fund, and here's the budget, what programs you're going to fund and at what level. You could fund them more than they are, you'll accelerate the progress. You can fund them less, but then things might fall apart. Same true with the Department of Veterans Affairs. Then I just started creating simulations and games, and just the idea that you divide students into teams, they own those decisions, they make some tough calls, and then you can really reflect and debrief on how it went and what they would have done differently, and how things could change or whatever else. So that was the work that I did at Ad Astra. I ran the school as a co-founder with Elon, and then I was fortunate to be able to hire a number of really fantastic educators that would teach classes that I can't teach, chemistry and data-driven decision making and all sorts of stuff like that. But synthesis has always kind of reflected in some ways like the soul of the school. So I guess so where that's headed is you run this. I've been running this school at SpaceX for that at the end of last year, it had been 6 years. We had 50 full-time kids. We had all kinds of partnerships with local schools. We had figured out corporate collaboratives with SpaceX, because how do you not take advantage of being on the campus of SpaceX? How do you not use the resources that are there? So created this corporate collaborative program where rather than just because you're part of the school, you just naturally get some sort of connection to SpaceX, you really kind of had to earn it. So we would just open up these one sentence questions that anyone could answer at any time. We'd support you in answering them. Things like, how would you create the supercharger network for South America? It's it hasn't been created yet, but it could be, and you could use available data and evidence to kind of figure out how SpaceX or Tesla's already thought about it. Then you kind of mock up your own model. Or how could you improve the grid fin? Or if SpaceX was moving the company headquarters from Hawthorne to Boca Chica, what are the impacts going to be, and how's it going to affect families and workers, and what would it take to move the company across the country? So anyway, those are kind of the things that were endemic to the work at Astra. And then as we would get undue attention, essentially, right? Because everyone's always looking for something innovative. What are the innovative models? How can we possibly scale these? I was fortunate to meet the CEO of Class Dojo. And Class Dojo, is the largest educational app in the world. It's something like 51 million users. And we talked about how we could scale some components of Astra. And there's always that fear, when you're scaling work, especially since I'm working with such a small number of students, and it's not our student population is not yet representative of the world. And I have a lot of hesitation about sharing this work initially. But what we agreed to do were create these things called conundrums. And you can look them up if you look up Class Dojo conundrums, or go to our YouTube channel. It's Astra Nova School Conundrums. Basically 1 minute videos that pose a question with seemingly equivalent answers, with the idea being that students need to talk in school and have constructive disagreement, and they should be able to disagree with their teachers, and not in a way where it's threatening, but just you see things a different way. And it's important to write a question in such a way where any person could see that one of these 3 or 4 or 5 options could be reasonable responses. So they're fun. Some of them are based, of course, on real things like eminent domain. Other things are based on more fictional scenarios. One example is there's this animal created called the Novaru, and the Novaru lives in a country. It's lived there for as long as anyone can remember. It's the national animal of this country. It's celebrated on their flag. They sing the national anthem. It mentions it. It's a very important part of their cultural identity. But the neighboring country decides, kind of in the secrecy of darkness, to start planting the only tree the Novaru eats just across the border. So the Novarus, sense this delicious, the only tree that they eat, it's actually more verdant in this other country, and they cross the border, and suddenly all of the Novarus that are in existence are across the border in this new country. And the question is what should happen next? Because now this country that has had the Novaru, that's part of their identity, it's part of the tourism industry is based on this. Should they be able to bring the Novarus back? Kind of what happens, because it was kind of nefarious in terms of what the other neighboring country did. Is there sort of a legal question here? So anyway, you just ask a question like that, and it just gives students space to actually think about what they would do. And there's something nice about, creating it where it kind of echoes reality, but it's distant enough that you can sort of take that impartial judgment view and not think that the choice that you make reflects your political ideology or I don't know, or anything else. It's cool to disagree. So students can answer that. You can post just kind of the data you quickly collect, and have students beyond just okay, share out why you think one thing versus another. Let's look at the data and sort of just have an open conversation about why it might be that most people think that the Nova should be returned to its home country. So anyway, I'm really, really grateful that conundrums have been released on Class Dojo on March 1st. There's been I think over 1 million views already, which is really, really quite remarkable. And that's a kind of a cool project in terms of how a small school can do somewhat innovative work, and then hopefully find ways to scale it for those that are looking for kind of different activities that you can quickly implement in your classroom, and then create new conversations that maybe otherwise would not be happening without this sort of partnership. So I guess kind of to finish up, we left Astra, left SpaceX, and sorry. Still to me, we left SpaceX, and Astra Nova will be a full-time online school going forward. The goal is to not raise money from wealthy folks or parent donors, but really to run the school in such a lean way that we're able to do a full sliding scale, be totally need blind, and then to work with students as collaborators to build out things that can be shared through platforms like Class Dojo. So that's the future of Astra Nova. That's the school that I'm trying to create. Right now, it's around 115 kids. Next year, it'll be more like 200, and we'll just sort of go from there. So that's Astra Nova, the nonprofit school. Amidst all the kind of craziness of COVID and leaving SpaceX and creating Astra Nova, I was approached by the lead engineer at Class Dojo that I had worked on conundrums with, and he asked if I would be open to starting a company based on synthesis. And I said no a couple times, more than a couple times, probably a dozen times, because I was like, I'm too busy. I don't have time for this. I don't have bandwidth for this. And then as it happens in these sorts of stories, sometimes it's just, you take one step and then it becomes two and then three, and then suddenly I'm signing the paperwork and we're incorporating this company, and I'm a co-founder and creative director of synthesis, which is the idea of taking synthesis, these games and puzzles and experiences I've been designing, and then trying to bring them, to every kid in the world, and try to do it in a way where, you start and get the experience nailed down, and you try to make it like less expensive, like as we go through it, to the point where like every kid had the opportunity to do an hour of synthesis a week. Because I believe that like thoughtfully designed experiences, which look very much like games, but games that require they're welcoming but complex. It's the fast and the slow, the cooperative, the competitive. You're in groups of 3 or so students playing on 6 teams, kids from around the world, and you're like figuring out how to curate an art exhibition, or you're figuring out how to manage a fishery. But it's like designed in such a way that it's like just really accessible, and the conversations are really rich. You put students at the center of that experience. You let them have the experience, and then you spend a lot of time like debriefing and reflecting on like what went well, what didn't, and then help them make connections. Synthesis, connect to synthesis, these higher level concepts, connect the higher level concepts to your own life, and make connections to the world. Because I really believe that if students have like a reservoir of experiences where they were at the center of those experiences, where they actually had to make a tough call, or they had to like decide if this deal was going to work, they take the deal and the deal turns out to not work well. You can really reflect on that sort of stuff. It just gives students like that confidence, that gives them that voice, and then it just gives them like these moments that become part of their identity. So that synthesis, that's its own kind of crazy moonshot project that, as of today, is probably headed towards 1,000 members from around the world in just a few months. That's a kind of a crazy startup thing that's now increasingly taking up more of my time. But my day job is Astra Nova School. It's kind of an honor of a lifetime. And that is, I guess, in a 15 or 20 minutes, kind of my story of Ad Astra, Astra Nova, and synthesis. So I'd be delighted to take any questions. I'll probably need to take off here because I guess we're not going to the hospital tonight. So, but anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all might have. And I do want to say, there's definitely a long way to go in terms of equity. Like, it's important to me that we get it right. And even being an online school, I have some real concerns about, are we really going to be able to serve if we want to be serving at Astra Nova? Same is true at Synthesis. But I think, with more equitable internet access, I really think that, this sort of thing will be a really important part of kids' education, even if it's just something that happens in their local school. Making synthesis a thing that kids do, that we say that they need to have meaningful experiences that are thoughtfully designed, and debrief on those experiences. The spreading of that idea of synthesis is something that's actually most important, not that they do it through the company of Synthesis or through Astra Nova.
Hey, Josh, that was amazing. And for the listeners, if you want to, if you have a question, feel free to put the question in the chat, and I can, and I will ask Josh those questions that you have. I'll start off with the first question while everybody else is thinking about a question, and put it into the chat so that Josh can answer that. Josh, when you, and correct me if I'm wrong, in 2015, you all founded an experiment of a school, which was Astra. What was, and then it turned into Astra Nova School. What were those differentiating characteristics, or what was something that was really, what were those things that were really different about Astra than any other school that you had worked in or heard about at the time?
I mean, Ad Astra, the thing is, when you have people come to visit a school like Ad Astra, especially when it was at SpaceX, people were looking to be blown away. You just are hoping that when you go to visit a school like that you see something that is wildly and unbelievably different. And there are at Astra Nova now and there were at Astra School then. Like certainly like conventional things, you'd walk into a class and you'd be like, yeah, like this is cool. Kids are, you know, building things, or they're conducting experiments, or they're like running their own clubs. But I think like the thing that was maybe like most unique, besides synthesis, which is where you have, you know, students are moving from breakout room to breakout room, and like serious negotiations are part of like auctions, bids, like just like that constant movement where the synthesis class could be happening and I could be anywhere else. I could be not in the school, because like a really thoughtfully designed question in that way, when you really get the norms locked down and you really like help students like and support them in it, like that's a thing that would like really, I think, that would surprise people to come to visit. And then the other thing is just like how seriously we took like students as collaborators. You know, like this partnership with Class Dojo, like I wrote those conundrums with students, you know, and I think how important that is to just be like so open about when you're designing kind of the startup school, to like let them be part of like the decisions, all of them really. You know, like we were fortunate, someone offered us money, like, you know, politically, someone we didn't totally agree with. We brought that question to the students, like, we could accept this money. This is what we could do. We could build out this new space. It'd be a really great opportunity, you know, to build out the school. But, you know, if you know, like, do you feel comfortable like taking this like money? Like, I mean, I don't, you know, it's like, I guess those questions that you get inevitably when you are like a small, nimble organization like that. I guess the thing that we maybe did most uniquely is bring that to the kids, put them at the center of it, you know, bring them in, and like not just do it to like kind of, I don't know, but like really to honor their voice, not to just kind of do it because it seems like, okay, we'll just kind of like, okay, we'll hear from you, but we're not actually going to like take that into account. So that constant like feedback of like, how did this experience go? How did this admissions process feel from you as a student who's already at the school? How did it feel when you went through it? How do we make it more equitable? How do we make it, you know, all those sorts of things. So I guess students as collaborators, and then certainly synthesis as like a really unique experience. Yeah.
Jeremiah, if you want to come off mute and you can ask your question, Jeremiah.
Certainly, and I want to thank everyone really for being part of this dialogue, and especially you, Josh, as it sounds like one of the founders of a really cool school. I've actually looked it up online because it seemed really interesting to me. I did teach a little bit in my past. I'm by no means no expert. The one question I did have, and I mean this in a very sort of positive way, but is there any sort of concern that a school like that, unless there's something I'm not understanding, could be overly one-sided? Like if you're just kind of thinking about critical thinking exercises, is there still like reading books, taking tests? Because there, as you know, there is something to be said for that too. Because someone could do critical thinking exercises all day long, but if they don't have a solid foundation in literature and a solid foundation in the arts and math, all of it, it could be tough in the real world, because it's more than just critical thinking. But there could be components to your school that I'm unaware of. So that's just an open-ended question for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. No, we do have those things. And I think it's just one of those, you know, it's just interesting, right? Like, it's just so easy to talk about like what the education system doesn't do, and how school is tough, and it could be so much better, and needs a change or be reimagined or reinvented. And like, it's difficult to be in that space to kind of, when people look to Astra Nova as like, this is the model of education for the future. Because like, truthfully, like, I believe the things that I've mentioned: students as collaborators, developing student voice, you know, giving them like, helping them make like better decisions, and like, but making like bad decisions basically in the sense of school of like the intellectual decisions that you're making. Ad Astra has English and science and math and other like classes that would strike you as like maybe like a little off center, but certainly like you would not walk into an Astra Nova math class and be like, I don't know what this is. Like, this is totally nuts. But the important piece is like, for every class that you have that's sort of more like straightforward, like you have like almost a complementary applied way of doing that sort of thing. So for every math class, there's like data-driven decision making. For every like science class, we do like a class for all the kids like on rocketry, like taught by like a former SpaceX engineer. Like, we just try to kind of go back and forth in that way. And part of that is because parents expect and believe that the foundational stuff is really important. And I agree with that largely. But for us, we do reimagine every year anew. So we never read the same thing. We never, you know, I guess math sometimes looks the same, but other than that, everything is kind of reinvented because we're constantly generating new content, because we believe that like, you should be incorporating the lessons learned from something you design, good, bad, or ugly, into the next thing that you design. And if you're not redesigning constantly, then there's a better experience you could have been designing had you taken the time to actually do it. So we're like maniacal about generating curriculum, I guess is like the way to say it. But we do have those basic classes. That's a really good question. So our kids are not going to high school. We're only 3rd through 8th grade. Our kids don't go to high school, and like what is this algebra 2 stuff? They're well prepared.
Thanks for that. Just as a general statement, I think it's great to have a focus on critical thinking, because I think that's something that is definitely missing in a lot of schools, the kind of the why things are being taught and thinking about things. So I feel there's a great value in that.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. Yep. Yeah, that's right.
There's one more question in the chat. Quasi Barth K.
Yeah, I had to find the mute button. Sorry about that. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Cool. Yeah, hey, this was great presentation, and it's inspiring to see this type of activity, and obviously the hook into the disruption aspect of it, and the folks that you rub doubles with certainly is an impressive thing, and that's what makes us want to learn more and reproduce that elsewhere. My question: are you in the LA area or California area, or are you in the Midwest?
I'm in LA.
Okay.
Yeah. So at Astra version 1 was in Hawthorne.
Okay.
Astra Nova is like fully online, but yeah, I live by the Port of Los Angeles, South LA.
Gotcha.
South Bay LA. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just the thing I wanted to mention was just that there's a similar program in Missouri as part of the Rockwood School District called Center for Creative Learning, and I'm not a teacher there, but my children participated in that. And it'd be really cool to see what's expanded beyond that, because that's been probably 15 years. But love to go and look at some of your information and resources, and and connect you with the folks there too, because you might have other folks that are willing to roll up their sleeves and expand out.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that recommendation. So Center of Creative Learning is it St. Louis or just somewhere else in Missouri?
Rockwood School District.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, they're amazing people that have done like unbelievable work over time.
Yeah.
It's so, I guess people just like to think that like Silicon Valley or people like Elon will create like the new model of school. And I think these things that I'm saying are like as old as Dewey, if not Plato, if not someone else, right? Like it's not revolutionary. It's just like, I guess for me, like the thing that was most clear was that you'd have to justify every allocation of time with students. Like, and in Elon, it wasn't like as though he was like there all the time and was like constantly like giving feedback. But you always, just think about like if Elon were to see this now as like a reflection of the school that he, co-created, would he believe that like this is a good use of time reflective of like the likely futures we're going to live in? Like, is this the type of thing, is this the experience that you can actually build on? Or is this just like a one-off experience that's done for some other purpose because it's how it's always been done, or because like the standards are in that way, or because we think that like it's really important that they do like side angle side proofs in geometry or whatever, right? It's like, if you were freed from that thinking and we're like, what are the experiences and what are sort of the things that are like most essential to build like highly efficacious people that can operate with kindness and generosity and like actually like produce like a better, more innovative, more just world? Like, what experiences are those? Which ones can happen in a classroom? Which ones cannot? And then how might we design those experiences and then let them have them as soon as possible? That is like most simply like what the design of Ad Astra was, and it continues as Astra Nova. And a lot of other people have been doing similar things, but usually, there's some limitation. You have to get accredited. You have to comply with some standards and all that stuff. And I respect all of that because I was just given the opportunity. I didn't have to do any of that. I would be fired if I said, well, we need to do it this way because, we need to get accredited. The next question for Elon would be like, why? Why do you need to be accredited? I'd be like, well, because I don't know, because we can get Google Classroom for free, or I don't know, or because we can like look, we can go to these like conferences once a year, and be like, you're fired. Like, no, create the best school in the world. If you're spending time filling out paperwork, you're probably not working on the best experience for students. So anyway, I mean, that's a hugely privileged position to be in, but that was the position I was in. And like, I'm just, you know, because I was in that position, I just try to like maniacally share what I've gleaned from it humbly. And those are the three things. So in terms of further resources, like synthesis.is is synthesis, astronova.org is Astronova, and then Class Dojo conundrums, you can look up, like, you know, that's pretty easy to Google.
Thanks for that question, and thanks for that, Josh. Josh, I know you have to go. Would you like to just give just like one push to our educators in our ecosystem here in St. Louis who are looking to create those experiences for students furthest away from opportunity? There are a lot of challenges that a lot of our students face, but it is important as the 21st century is changing and ever evolving, and there unique skills that students are going to need to have in order to be productive and to be in the next wave of the 21st century. Is it a push that you would give our ecosystem, our education leaders, our teachers for those students?
Yeah. No, I mean, you know, kids love to play games, right? Whether they're gamers or just in games in general is like so natural to all of us. We all, I don't know, some people like instructions. I've always hated them. So I try not to create games that have tons of instructions, but just getting them in that gamified environment is important. And everyone likes expressing opinions, you know, especially when it's, you know, for anything from like, you know, is LeBron better than MJ, or it doesn't, like, we all like giving opinions, passing judgment, not in necessarily a bad way, but just like making a choice, basically. So I guess the one thing I've like really fought hard to learn, and I've learned the hard way, is like give them more choices. And in questions, give them more choices where it's not so binary, like you're right or you're wrong. I hate the idea of a student who like feels like they don't have a voice in school because they're afraid of being wrong or being embarrassed, or like, you know, the teacher calls on them and it's like just this dreadful moment. Like, it's just, I feel like it's just so freeing to be asked a question where there is no right answer. And yet they're all respected in their own way. And it's like really just like, you know, just sharing like why you think that thing, and then be open to changing your mind. Like that type of thing, as much as that can be created, I think that goes a really long way. So that would be the thing that I would suggest most. And conundrums are kind of aimed for younger students, but you could certainly, and for adults, they certainly work. And you can use that frame and that model of seemingly equivalent options. 3 is usually a good number. I wouldn't go more than 5 or 6. That structure really, really works. And even if it's just 15 minutes, it can really, you know, change the tone of the day.
Ooh, well, all right, Josh, I want to thank you so much for helping us kick off our first talk, and a pre-congratulations to you and the new family member and your family. Thank you for still being able to make the talk today, and I hope everything goes well.
I really appreciate it. Hey, thank you everyone for joining, and take care. Honored to be here. All right, see you guys. All right, bye.
And so for everybody who is left, I just want to some housekeeping things, just to talk about the series in general. The goal of this speaker series will be to motivate and empower listeners to begin to think outside the proverbial box of what we think education should look like, sound like, or feel like. Throughout this series, we'll showcase innovators around the country who are thinking radically different about not only how to reimagine education, but how to provide new and equitable experiences to all students, including those who identify as low income, underrepresented minorities, and or those students who are most proximate to the injustices in our education system. And so this particular series will be held on the last Thursday of each month, and our next talk will take place April 29th at 5 p.m. The talks will follow the same format. We'll introduce the speaker will lead a learning experience, we'll have a brief Q&A, and close the show. And so again, thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope that everyone joins us again on April 29th at 5 p.m. for our second talk in our series. Have a great night.